Love is one of the most powerful forces in human existence, but it is also one of the most dangerous when entered blindly. For many women, love becomes a battlefield where boundaries are blurred, sacrifices are glorified, and silence is mistaken for strength. But here's a hard truth. Love is not supposed to cost you your dignity, your voice, or your peace of mind. And yet countless women, in the name of loyalty or fear of being alone, say yes to things that quietly erode their spirit. You were not created to be a placeholder in a man's life. You were not designed to absorb emotional chaos or carry the burden of someone else's immaturity. Your soul is not a dumping ground for neglect, manipulation, or half-hearted affection. The ability to say no is one of the most profound acts of self-love a woman can practice. And in the realm of romantic relationships, what you refuse to accept shapes the quality of love you will receive. Today, we're going to talk about 5 things, specific, subtle, and significant, that every woman should learn to reject in love. Not because you're bitter, not because you're difficult, but because your life is valuable and your heart is sacred. When a woman becomes a man's emotional healer, she doesn't realize how quickly the relationship transforms into a silent contract of suffering. It doesn't always happen dramatically. It starts subtly. He's emotionally distant, so you lean in. He's angry and you try to calm him. He's cold and you think it must be something you did. And so you shift. You start absorbing his moods, taking on his silence as your failure, and excusing his lack of effort because he's been through a lot. This becomes your script. You see his pain as your assignment. But here's the truth. Love does not require you to abandon yourself to patch up someone else's damage. You can be compassionate without becoming a container for chaos. You can be understanding without sacrificing your own mental and emotional balance. When you take on the role of healer, you unconsciously tell him, "I will carry what you won't." But that is not love. That is imbalance. That is emotional servitude. And the more you overfunction in the relationship, the more he underfunctions. It creates a toxic cycle where your worth is quietly reduced to how useful you are in managing his dysfunction. This dynamic is not sustainable, and worse, it teaches you to accept less while giving more. You think if you can just love him better, he'll finally become the man he promised to be. But that promise often remains unfulfilled because he never had to become that man. He had you doing all the work for him. And slowly, you start losing the essence of who you are. You become tired, anxious, always analyzing, walking on emotional eggshells, hoping for moments of peace that never last. That's not a relationship. That's emotional survival. A healthy man does not need you to be his mother. He doesn't require you to explain his emotions to him or translate his behavior to protect his image. A healthy man does not force you to justify poor treatment under the umbrella of, "He's been hurt before." Everyone has been hurt, but pain is not an excuse to cause more of it. Growth is a choice, not a gift someone gives you. And until a man decides to face his wounds, therapy won't help, love won't save him, and your loyalty won't fix what he refuses to confront. You have to ask yourself, am I in love with who he is or who I think he could become? Because if your entire relationship is built on potential, then you're not loving a man. You're loving a fantasy. And fantasies are costly. They cost time, energy, hope, and in the end, your self-respect. You are not hard to love. You're just exhausted from trying to prove your worth in a space that never required him to meet you there. And here's what makes this dynamic so dangerous. When you finally reach the point of burnout, when you collapse under the weight of healing someone who won't heal himself, you blame yourself. You feel like you failed. But the truth is the relationship failed you the moment it asked you to become less so someone else could feel whole. Love is not supposed to drain you. It's supposed to elevate you. It should be a partnership where both people are responsible for their healing, their behavior, and their emotional growth. Anything less is an arrangement, not a relationship. And if you're the only one doing the emotional labor, you're not in love. You're in bondage. Say no. Say it clearly. Say it without guilt. And say it with the understanding that saving yourself is the most loving thing you can do. We live in a culture that has dangerously confused unpredictability with excitement. That confusion has left a trail of broken hearts, especially among women who've been conditioned to believe that if love isn't messy, it's not passionate enough. That belief is a lie, a destructive one. Inconsistency isn't romance. It's a psychological game that creates addiction to emotional highs and lows. When a man shows up strong one day and disappears the next, when his affection is conditional, when his presence is determined by his mood or convenience, that's not passion, it's a control mechanism. And what happens over time is even more damaging. You begin to measure love by how anxious it makes you feel. You start thinking that longing equals love. That confusion is normal, that the chaos means he must care, because why else would he keep coming back? But that's not care, that's manipulation, that's the hook. The intermittent affection keeps you waiting, hoping, chasing the next moment of warmth like a reward. And when it comes, it feels like a drug. Not because it's love, but because you were starved of it for so long that any small sign of approval feels intoxicating. That is trauma bonding, not chemistry. And the longer you stay, the more you doubt your ability to walk away. A stable man doesn't send mixed signals. He doesn't keep you guessing. He's not affectionate only when it benefits him or when he senses you're slipping away. His interest is not performative. He doesn't need you to be confused to keep you. Real love shows up with clarity, not games. It says, I want you, and I'm here, and I'll prove it in how I treat you daily. That's not boring. That's mature. It's easy to mistake drama for depth, because so many of us were never shown what peace looks like in relationships. If you grew up around inconsistency, if you were taught that love had to be earned, you might mistake the absence of anxiety as the absence of love. But that's not love's absence, that's peace. Learn to recognize peace and stop calling it dull. Learn to see the beauty in reliability. That's where safety lives. That's where healthy love grows. If you constantly feel like you're the one chasing, initiating, or adjusting to his unpredictable energy, you need to stop and ask yourself, what am I really holding on to? Is it him, or is it the hope that one day he'll become the man he only pretends to be when he wants something? Because inconsistency doesn't just hurt you, it conditions you. It teaches your body to live in survival mode. You become reactive, hyper-aware, always scanning for signs of distance, misreading silence as rejection, interpreting withdrawal as something you caused. It drains you, it rewires your nervous system, and eventually you start thinking the problem is you, but the problem is the pattern. The problem is the belief that chaos is a normal part of love. Saying no to inconsistency means reclaiming your emotional clarity. It means refusing to entertain anyone who destabilizes your peace. It means understanding that love isn't supposed to confuse you, it's supposed to ground you, and anyone who leaves you in emotional limbo is showing you they're not ready for the type of connection you desire. You're not asking for too much by expecting consistency. You're asking for basic human decency. And if a man cannot give you that, he should not have access to your energy, your time, or your heart. Say no, boldly, unapologetically, and without second guessing. Your peace is too sacred to gamble on someone else's inconsistency. There is a deep and dangerous myth that tells women they must soften themselves to be loved, that being too smart, too successful, too opinionated, too vocal, too ambitious will scare a man away. And so many women, consciously or unconsciously, begin to shrink. They hide parts of themselves. They hold back their thoughts in conversations. They apologize for their passions. They dull their achievements so they don't appear threatening. And the saddest part is, society rewards them for it. It calls them easygoing, low maintenance, supportive, as if those traits are only validated when they exist in the absence of personal identity. But the cost of this shrinking is profound. Every time you make yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable, you are trading authenticity for acceptance. And over time, that trade becomes your default. You become so used to playing a role that you forget who you were before the performance began. What's often overlooked is that when a woman shrinks herself in love, she doesn't just lose volume, she loses visibility. She starts to disappear from her own life. Her voice becomes quieter, her desires become negotiable, her needs become secondary. And while she may believe this sacrifice is making the relationship stronger, it's doing the opposite. Because love that demands you be less than who you are will never be capable of sustaining who you truly are. You cannot build intimacy on a foundation of preteens. Sooner or later, the real you will surface, and if he only loved the version of you that compromised herself for his ego, then he never truly loved you at all. That's the truth so many women avoid facing, but it's the key to liberation. You are not intimidating. You are not too much. You are a woman who refuses to abandon herself to make a man feel more significant. And the right man won't be threatened by your power, he'll be drawn to it. He'll recognize it as a strength, not a flaw. But you will never find that man if you keep making yourself smaller for those who can't handle your full capacity. And here's where many women get stuck. They think that being fully themselves means being alone. That if they raise their standards, speak their minds, and own their worth, they will scare away all their options. And that might be true at first, but losing attention isn't the same as losing value. You don't need a crowd. You need one person who sees you and chooses you without asking you to dim your light. There's an internal peace that comes when you stop performing in relationships. When you show up as your whole self, flawed, fiery, brilliant, bold, and say, "This is who I am." Not as a test, not as a threat, but as a truth. And if that truth causes someone to walk away, let them walk. Because the woman who walks in her fullness doesn't chase, she attracts. And what she attracts is aligned with her worth, not her wounds. So if love asks you to quiet your voice, to question your intelligence, to hide your gifts, or to play small to preserve his pride, that is not love. That is control. And the only response to that kind of dynamic is a firm, unwavering no. Say it with your words. Say it with your actions. Say it with the way you refuse to negotiate your brilliance. You are not meant to shrink in love. You are meant to shine. One of the most draining, soul-crushing experiences a woman can have in a relationship is carrying the weight of it entirely on her shoulders. It starts with little things. She initiates the conversations, plans the dates, checks in emotionally, follows up on unresolved issues, and in return, silence, indifference, bare minimum effort. But because she loves him or believes in the relationship, she keeps showing up. She keeps giving. She tells herself maybe he's just not good at expressing himself, or maybe he just needs more time. And so she overcompensates. She becomes the emotional engine of the relationship, always fueling the connection, always fixing, always maintaining. But relationships are not built to survive when only one person is showing up. Effort should be mutual. It should be a reflection of shared respect, shared investment, shared desire to build something meaningful. When a woman is the only one carrying the emotional labor, that's not a relationship. It's emotional servitude. And what makes it even more dangerous is that this one-sided effort is often masked by temporary gestures. He might show up just enough to keep her hoping. A sweet message after days of silence, a compliment when he senses she's slipping away, a vague promise of change when she's reached her breaking point, but the follow-through never comes. It's just enough to keep her in place. This inconsistency becomes a trap. She believes that if she just keeps giving, eventually he'll meet her halfway. But what actually happens is she begins to deplete herself. She sacrifices her needs, her standards, and her voice in the name of holding it together. She tells herself she's strong, that she's loyal, that she's patient, but what she's really doing is bleeding herself dry in the hopes that love will finally feel fair. There is no badge of honor in being the only one trying. There is no trophy for enduring neglect. A healthy relationship is a collaboration, not a test of how much you can endure. If a man wants you, you will never have to beg him for consistency. You will never have to chase him for clarity. His effort will be visible, intentional, and frequent. And if you have to constantly explain to someone how to love you, how to communicate, how to show up, then what you have is not a love story. It's a job you're not being paid for, and it's okay to stop working for something that's breaking you. Too many women were taught that their value comes from how much they can give, from how long they can stay, from how much they can endure without complaining. But true love doesn't ask you to break yourself to make something work. It invites you to grow, to heal, to rest. You should not have to carry both your heart and his. You should not be the only one watering a garden he won't even step into. If he's not matching your energy, matching your effort, and building with you, not just benefiting from you, then it's time to walk away. Not out of anger, but out of wisdom. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't beg for participation. She doesn't fight to be seen. She doesn't chase a man who's content being a ghost. She invests where she's valued. And that begins with saying no to imbalance, no to exhaustion disguised as love, no to being the only one who cares enough to keep the relationship alive. Say it as a declaration of your worth, not as revenge, not as punishment, but as truth. There comes a point when a woman must learn to say no to love that demands she abandon her boundaries. Not because she's angry or bitter or difficult, but because she has finally realized that boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They are gates to protect the love she has for herself. Too often, women are conditioned to believe that unconditional love means unconditional tolerance, that if you truly care, you'll forgive anything, accept everything, endure indefinitely. But that's not love. That's emotional erosion. That's self-sacrifice disguised as compassion. A boundary isn't a punishment. It's a clear, self-respecting message. This is what I allow, and this is what I refuse to entertain. And any man who sees your boundary as a threat is not interested in love. He's interested in control. When a woman sets boundaries, it shifts the dynamic. Suddenly, the emotional playing field is leveled. She is no longer available for manipulation, for gaslighting, for the slow erosion of her standards, and that can be terrifying to a man who was benefiting from her lack of them. He may accuse her of being selfish, cold, distant, or too rigid. He may try to guilt her back into compliance by saying she's changed, but she has changed. And that's the point. She has stopped confusing love with submission. She has stopped equating compromise with silence. She now understands that a relationship without boundaries is not romantic. It's dangerous. It teaches both partners that one person's comfort is more important than the other's clarity. And yet, boundary setting is often the hardest act of self-respect because it comes with loss. The loss of illusion, the loss of comfort, sometimes even the loss of the relationship itself. But what's gained in return is invaluable: peace of mind, emotional freedom, and the ability to breathe without waiting for the next emotional violation. Women who say yes to everything, who forgive too quickly, who explain themselves too often, who shrink their needs to maintain harmony, are not peaceful. They are exhausted. They are battling quiet wars with themselves every day, and eventually that battle becomes unbearable, because deep down, they know what's happening. They're just afraid of what will happen if they finally say no. But here's the truth. Saying no doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. Saying no to being talked down to, dismissed, ignored, or mistreated is the beginning of returning to yourself. It's choosing truth over tolerance. It's realizing that your silence does not protect you. It only empowers the behavior you're trying to avoid. And once a woman reclaims that power, everything changes. She starts making decisions from self-worth, not self-doubt. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her no is calm, firm, and final, and it's not up for debate. The beauty of boundaries is that they don't just protect you, they reveal everything. They show you who respects you, who listens, who adjusts, and who disappears when they're no longer allowed to cross the lines that once kept you wounded. So let them walk. Let them call you names. Let them say you're too much, because the woman who protects her peace is not too much. She's finally just enough for herself. And that is the kind of woman who does not settle, not for crumbs, not for confusion, not for love that costs her her voice. She knows that real love honors her lines, not tries to erase them. And that kind of love can only find her once she says no to everything that isn't.